All right, and moving onwards, we are going to our second panel for today, titled Shaping the Next Economic Era with Web3 Technology. And there's sure a lot to cover here. So I'd like to introduce first our guest speakers, Paul Claudius, co-founder at DA. Hoon Kim, CTO at the Astar Network. Matt Gerbiel. Hey, how's it going? Matt Gerbiel, growth manager at Redstone Finance. And Ricardo Lamana, founder at OpenQ. And featuring our moderator for this panel, Kristina Lucrezia Cornèr, editor-in-chief at Cointelegraph. Thank you.
So much. Do you hear me now? Amazing. Thank you very much. I'm really honored and happy to talk about a very important and interesting topic in my opinion. So we won't pitch you today, but I invite you all to check up the bio of all these amazing guys here because they are doing some amazing job in the space. But I want today to talk to you guys as people who work in the space. Like we are building a new Web3 economy. And let's talk about economy in its etymological sense. Economy comes from oikos, that means household. So this is our house. This is now our new home that we are building the space around us, for our children, for our friends, families, whatever. What is decentralization and Web3 for you? What does it mean for you? What advantages does it offer for you as human beings? And what excites you the most in the space from this perspective?
Yeah, okay, let's go one by one. So yeah, decentralization, I mean, you can look at it, I guess, when people talk about decentralization, you usually think about the technology stack, but what I find, and especially with your intro given, everyone building their house, I think for me, the governance aspect is much more relevant in Web3, because decentralization on the technological stack is imperfect, and we just discussed this. There are different, I guess, notions how decentralized something is or not, and this will change also over time when UX improves or when the needs for decentralization, depending on the application, vary. But on the governance level, I believe decentralization, we see this today, is already working, at least partially because there are so many people building and everyone can take a role in the governance process. And if one feels that the level of decentralization within a governance process is not given, it's easy to choose just a different project or different application where you can put your money at or collaborate or not. So here I think this is what excites me most, and this I guess somehow relates to DAOs and providing the rails to give everyone the opportunity to contribute. Yeah.
For me, what is decentralization in Web3? Decentralization at its core for me is freedom. It implies freedom. It's an alternative option for a lot of people. And Web3 would be the next era of internet where instead of having a centralized service or relying on a centralized figure, for the first time, you're able to create a self-sufficient network that is operated by people who use it. So the whole stakeholder dynamic would change, I would say. Web3 itself is a disruptive technology in that sense. And if you look at the history of decentralization, the term decentralization, I believe was actually first used after the French Revolution to show like, yeah, like we started from a centralized authority, but now we're going towards decentralization, where it's not just a single monarch who's making decisions, but it's the local, delegates or local authorities who can autonomously make their decisions, discuss something, and then be more democratic. So in that sense, yeah, like definitely, decentralization is another state, but I don't want to say decentralization is a solution or a replacement. It's just an alternative in my point of view, because there's definitely value in centralization for certain things. So making everything decentralization is like kind of total anarchy. And there's also the other way around, where total centralization is essentially a dictatorship. So we want to have that middle ground, and decentralization is like an alternative for people who really want to have ownership in what they use or what they want to provide. But it doesn't have to be always that way, I guess. Yeah.
So in your ideal world, what share does decentralization get?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Like if you have to assign percentage to centralized and decentralized worlds.
Well, I mean, that's really hard to say. Like, I don't think I have the authority to define a percentage, but...
At least it's not 50-50. Like, otherwise it would be pretty simple.
Oh, yeah. But I would say, like, I guess it really depends on what people want and the mindset, because the way how we see it is society changes over time. Generation changes, the mindset changes. So right now we're used to centralization, and let's face it, like centralized services provide better UX. They provide better service, quality service. Decentralization, less quality because you have to be responsible for your actions. It's like, yeah, like I guess centralization is kind of like being a child. Decentralization is like being an adult, and I mean, like, you know, in life, you're forcing people to become an adult at some point, but the way how we consume services should have have an option. So right now, if we're talking about the current state of society, yeah, definitely the majority is centralized, but in the future, I could definitely see this percentage grow, and we're gonna have like at least like 30% decentralized, emphasis on decentralization. And still, I think the vast majority of people will still prefer centralization or a semi-centralized system because of the convenience. And I don't expect those people to like jump right in and be a degen, you know, from the get-go.
So like decentralization is an alternative, but a better alternative. Okay, Matt, what do you expect from decentralization, and what do you think people want? Do they really want more centralization because of convenience, or you think we can also convince them that sometimes the centralization is more convenient?
Sure. So I think I'll have a more philosophical take on this one, because I always like to look at decentralization as sort of an exit pill, because I imagine two possible scenarios. There's no denying that the world is going drastically digital. In general, our society is getting more and more digital. So I can imagine two possible scenarios. So the first one is this kind of dystopian cyberpunk 2077-like world, which is controlled by the mega corporations that possess all the possible data, and because of that are able to possess the society as well. And on the other hand, we have a situation where the power is spread more evenly. And I think this is the big hope behind decentralization, so that we can identify those places in a society, in the world in general, that hold too much power and be able to offset them with decentralizing the tech stack, decentralizing the power, the voting power, and whatever power you would like to define in a society. So for me, this is sort of an exit pill from this dystopian future controlled by the corporations. But obviously, we have to keep in mind that it has to be done in a manner that the mainstream user can understand and that the mainstream user wants. So perhaps I would also imagine decentralization as a spectrum, sort of. So I think it would be advisable to have this sort of decentralized base layer in terms of technology, for example, that is decentralized as much as possible by definition. And on top of that, we can build applications, clients, protocols that are less decentralized, more centralized, that are more end user facing, more customer focused. So, this is a theoretical example, but I'm sure you know what I'm going here. So basically, I think that decentralization is the only option we have if it comes to avoiding this sort of dystopian corporate-led future. I might be wrong on this one. I'd like to be wrong on this one. But if I'm right, then we should probably think on how to prevent this thing from happening and how to push for decentralization in a way that's also understandable to mainstream users in general.
Ricardo, what's your take on this majority versus our community?
So I think everybody already summed up probably everything that you guys already heard about. So for me, it's mostly ownership of data and then the technological advantages that we have. So from a technological perspective, what cryptocurrencies offers with smart contracts, etc., is way more advanced than what the Stripe API can offer to us. Yeah? And I don't know how many of you guys know what Stripe does exactly. Maybe you can raise your hand real quick. Really, nobody. Oh, that's crazy. Okay, so imagine you're an e-commerce store and you want to make credit card payments possible. You have to implement Visa, MasterCard, and all these different payment methods. And Stripe essentially made it simple to just provide one integration and one solution to offer every payment method like PayPal, credit card, all together. Yeah? So Stripe essentially brought everything together and integrated it in a well-designed API that everybody chose over the last 5 to 10 years for their e-commerce shop. Yeah? And crypto is essentially the next advance where money becomes so programmable that it offers even more solution to a developer. Yeah? But that may be said, it's not so interesting to the audience if it's not from a technological perspective. It goes back to data ownership. Yeah? And why do we want data ownership? It goes back to the facts with like Facebook, Cambridge Analytica. Companies know more about us than our parents know about us. They know everything, and they have the rights to decide what they want to do with this data, because apparently they set up legal documents that we confirm about all of this. But to be honest, if anybody of you just read about what Facebook's last disclaimer put on, probably nobody of us would use Facebook. But nobody cares, right? So the data ownership part is for me what the vision about decentralization is representing. But on the other hand, also who is really caring, right? Because most people still use Instagram and Facebook, even though they had this huge data exploitations, right? So what essentially I boil down to is like, yeah, we have this vision, we have this technological advantages, but we need to think about Web3 and decentralization not as a USP and just as a matter of solving a technical challenge. Yeah? And the USP needs to come from somewhere else. It needs to be the product that is more advantageous than Instagram, like the shift from Instagram to TikTok. That's what we need to build, the product. And then Web3 and decentralization is just a matter to solve challenges like avoid data breaches like Cambridge Analytica, and also to avoid that, governments like, China and North Korea have, the hand over all their citizens and can decide what they want to do with like credit system and go into the dystopia direction. So yeah, that's how I would sum it up.
You mentioned some interesting stuff that, in my opinion, is relative to what I would love to ask you next. So we are building a new space, but we definitely learn from our errors in the past. How do you see this building of the Web3 in terms of legacy and lessons that we got from the order that we had before? And to which extent should it be the case? Because I don't know if you are acquainted with the creative design theory, where in order to build something or to find a solution, you shouldn't think of problems or the current box. So it's not in the box, it's not even out of the box, there is no box. Not problem, solution, but why and how do we see the space for the next generation? How do we see our lives? And applying the past only as an example. So how do you see this relation to the reality and to the past and to the financial order that we are living in, to the centralized order, centralized governance? And how do you think we can learn from it to the best possible sustainability for the next step that we are building?
I mean, if you look at DeFi, so this kind of connects, I think, to what we just discussed, like decentralization for the majority of people. Nobody, or 99% don't choose an application because it's decentralized, just because they want to use it. And DeFi, I think, was something, again, everybody wanted to use. So here wasn't the great UX of seeing pictures from people you like or you look up to, but it was basically a financial incentive. So out of, I guess, after the crypto winter, DeFi kind of promised utility to a lot of people to hear what was the use case, make money. And majority of people who were, I don't know, investing some coins were also probably not in for the decentralization, but just the builders, but probably also not all of them. Anyways, doesn't matter. I think it clearly shows you need to just provide something people want, and then you can actually grow infrastructure which is decentralized. But coming back to your actual question now, I think we haven't seen really in the last 2 years like we're building financial primitives which are super sustainable or provide financial inclusion to anyone. Luckily, there are these stories, but some out of luck. But I think an equal amount of people also lost money. So in the end, it doesn't really matter what everybody wants to have in the future, but just what's being built and seeing if this actually provides to enough people some value, and hopefully people over time taking learnings from the past, as they did, I guess, in 2018 financial crash. But then now we have meme stocks, so also in TradFi, I think you don't see really there's a learning of sustainable investment. So I think it's will take some time, and people are learning along the way, but in the end, everybody's taking a decision for themselves. So I'm not 100% sure if Web3 or decentralization will provide better or more inclusive financial primitives, because we haven't seen that so much in the past.
Actually, I could put a different approach to this. So let's first look at the history of financial systems in general. Back when financial systems were first a thing, back in the ancient Mesopotamian era, where farmers could give an IOU, saying that yes, this clay tablet that says like I owe you how many grains of wheat or whatever. If you after the season is over and we harvest our goods, like I'll give you the amount that was written in the clay tablet in exchange for the wheat. And that's like essentially the first currency, if you think about it. And that's the financial system, really. That's the basis of any financial system. It's an IOU. And it was very decentralized back then. Anyone can issue it. Anyone can just borrow it. There was no regulation at all. The problem here is with ancient decentralized finance, or ancient DeFi, I like to call it, is that there was no guarantee. Like it's a wild west. It's full of scams. It's full of like lies and deceptions. Everyone just going, just trying to pump up the numbers, artificially pump up numbers. It was a huge problem. So that's where when the government saw that, or I guess those in power saw that a lot of people are suffering from this. But there's two directions here. One is the whole concept of finance itself is so useful because it's so convenient. So we don't want to completely ban this, but we still want to prevent scams from happening. That's where regulations come in. That's when government wants to give some guarantees. Like by law, you have to, if you say that you owe someone somewhat of a certain amount of grain, you have to deliver on that, or else you'll be punished. So it puts by imposing those restrictions, it incentivizes people to fulfill their promise. So centralized authority essentially gave the guarantee layer, the insurance layer, and the trust layer. This is also what banks are doing. Banks, when it first came out, I think when banking was like really big was from Renaissance era. anyone can start their own bank, anyone can lend out money, anyone can just go crazy, beat shit up. But that was a problem. But the banking system itself is great. It's just like the way how they did it was a problem. So the government came in again, centralized authorities, and then there's also a business aspect where if a business sells insurance and safety to people by saying like, if you pay for our insurance, we will guarantee that whatever deal that you make, you'll be filled on it, and that becomes another business layer. So you can see like every time we start from decentralization, we sort of end up in centralized position. But what blockchain and I guess decentralized technology, Web3 does is it removes the trust layer and the insurance layer. So back in with digital currency, digital transactions, there were so many middlemen involved in it just because of the risk involved in it. So how can you guarantee that? Well, the government was the one who guaranteed that. The centralized authorities, they guarantee safety of any transactions happening. But thanks to technical evolution, now we have we can remove those middlemen and still be able to see the same like benefits by having as if we were having the middleman. But because it's an early stage, there's definitely like scams, there's definitely a lot of problems, and it's completely decentralized. But at some point, we're going to have a balance where, because we still understand that this technology is great. Everyone, even the governments, they're not saying like we're going to completely ban blockchain, we're just going to control it a little bit. So we're going to have to find that sweet spot, and it's sort of a tug of war between those in control versus those who want control. And those who want control could be just your average citizens, people who are unfortunate, or it could be people who used to have power but they lost power. Depends on this, which era we're talking about. But it's always a tug of war between who owns the control. And unlike an actual tug of war where there's a clear winner in society, it's more like we're finding that sweet position and the perfect balance where both parties agree that, yeah, I can lose this amount of control, but I will gain this much control, and the other way around.
Thank you for this perspective, and it actually puts the financial ecosystem within a broader image that is social ecosystem, and everything is pretty imagined in our life. I mean, it was created through the traditions, but let's focus a little bit more on the social dimension of the Web3. Also because, well, communications are something that is part of our digital life. We were talking about financial inclusion. What about social inclusion? I think personally that there can't be financial inclusion without social inclusion. And now every social dimension is actually articulated within social medias. So how do we imagine Web3 social media? Is it something that, bringing to the previous discussion, should it be based on the legacy of the current social media platforms, or should it be something, well, different? Give you the floor.
So I think it's an important question, because I think what we are doing with Web3 and social media and communication in Web3 right now sort of boils down to coming back to those Web 1 principles that Web 1 was built upon. So if you look at the history of media in general, what internet did to newspapers and television was it changed the dynamic from the news going top down to the news going bottom up. And it's especially important, and it's especially visible in regimes that are more authoritarian than democratic. So I'm from Poland. We are sort of coming towards this authoritarian regime style of governing a country a little bit. And I can see, the differences between those news that come up at the internet and what the official narrative is in the newspapers or in the television. So basically what internet did back then was it democratized the access to information, to communication as well, and it sort of decentralized the narrative. But then, in the late stage of Web 2, came the corporations that took over the narrative once again, and that's the stage that we are right now. So I think what we are doing with Web 3 right now is sort of taking the power from the hands of centralized entities once more, and once more coming back to the situation where sort of the access to producing viable information is more evenly spread out throughout the whole society. And also, I think, in terms of innovation and building innovative products, Web3 is an interesting kind of space, because you can think of it as, for example, taking a Lens protocol as an example. You have a base layer of the tech stack is there, so all of the applications that are built upon Lens protocol share the same database of users. So if you are an innovator and want to build the next better Facebook or whatever is built on Lens, then you can focus pretty much on the product aspect of it and use the database of the underlying infrastructure that is already there. So I think in theory it should be easier to spark up the network effects by doing this way. Obviously, at the assumption that you were a better product that what is already built on the underlying protocol. So in general, in this context, I think, you know, the mainstream does not really realize this kind of shift that we can do once more, because I also believe that, you know, in Western societies, the mainstream does not realize sort of the discrepancies between the narrative that is pushed top down and the narrative that could be built bottom up, but it's becoming more and more important. Also, the Western societies are becoming more and more, or the governments are trying to impose more and more power over the societies. I think Canada is a great example. So recent protests and Canada trying to stop people from transacting Bitcoin and things like that back in 2021. It shows the general direction in which we are heading. And I think it's super important to be able to spread out the possibility of creating valuable information throughout the whole society and do what Web1 did to centralized newspapers and media in general once again.
Yeah, I think everybody of you guys should check out Lens. It's a really interesting project. And I think it's the right approach compared to 2017, where social networks were built on top of their own blockchains, were definitely flawed. But in general, I think, you know, if we would implement it how I would like to see it, then we would just clone all the existing social media and just bring the users to that, because it would be definitely better. Just for the reason that the companies don't own the data and can, you know, do whatever they want with it. I'm just a believer that people should own their own data, and that's a really important for us, especially if we look at countries that are developing more into a direction where the government is kind of opposing certain directions that are not, you know, that what the majority wants to see. So definitely do that, but the reality is people don't really care in the end, right? Like, how many people did switch after Facebook had this data breach, or all these other social medias that had, you know, massive leaks of emails, passwords, and all of this? So
has anyone here stopped using Facebook? Wow.
Oh yeah. Well, but also you guys all paid for a ticket for a decentralized conference, right? So that's also probably the reason why you switched. But yeah, that said, I think we should all switch, but in the essence, the mass won't switch because they don't care at this point. Yeah. So the reason how we make the switch is that the founders that are building these social applications should just focus on the product, and the decentralized layer shouldn't be marketed even. You know, people shouldn't see as, oh yeah, you own your own data now, use this Twitter clone. They should see more as a new iteration of a product that's just cool. Yeah. Just compare it maybe in social media. I think the recent trend is from Instagram, this Be Real thing, where you can post a selfie and you cannot add any filter and you can just do one picture. Probably will fail. I don't know. I'm not a guy that uses Instagram. But, you know, these kind of ideas we need to think about, and then we just plug it in with Web3. And that's how we maybe get the masses to it. Yeah? And then we can all approve it because we like Web3.
Before we move to Q&A, and I really want to hear questions from the audience today, I would love for everyone here to highlight your use case, how decentralization can be applied to make this world better. I can start. My favorite topic is climate change, and I think that the blockchain community is the one who definitely has potential to change something, because otherwise we are so late. Because the blockchain community is the only one right now that I see who are daring, who are used to solve issues right now, not after 2 months of negotiations. And this is the only thing that can save us from just collapse of all these centralized initiatives that are not working in a decentralized manner. So this is my case, and it's by purpose that I do not talk about media, because for me it's like too complicated. I haven't yet decided how much I want it to be decentralized. So if any one of you wants to talk about journalism, really happy to hear your thoughts, or anyone else that you can't help mentioning for your future world, for your future, sustainable future.
Again, what drives us and fascinates me mostly are DAOs, and the opportunity by DAOs basically giving people access to contribute and be rewarded for their contribution globally, because we have a bunch of people around the world who are at places where there may be not some resources or whatnot. And I think we saw this on a micro basis with our project, that we'll have people from all over the world who are sitting in some remote place and are earning a living by contributing into something they find interesting, and they have little switching costs, so they get educated somewhere, can contribute somewhere else, and this is, for me currently, with and around Web3, the most the most driving force I'm interested in, completely independent from the technology, and building tooling around that this becomes more accessible, and augmenting it with easy accessible learning and education to get someone from 0 to 1 and then contribute. Yeah.
I agree with Paul a lot. I was about to say something similar too, but I guess I could sort of elaborate a little bit more on that in my perspective of how I think the Web3 technology is going to change the future, affect the social interaction in society. Definitely, DAOs are a huge component, I think. Governance, participation. Biggest thing is, well, Web3 can be applied for any community-driven project. It really enables community-driven projects to move, because traditionally, even if you wanted to make a community-driven project, it will ultimately become corporate. It has to become corporate because of the tax reasons, because of so many complicated reasons. It just makes sense to be corporate. But in blockchain, first ever, we can have a entity that doesn't have to be centralized, that doesn't have to be tied and integrated to our existing system. So that's a huge potential I see. Like for games, for example, if you want to make a game, traditionally you had to go corporate just to finance the project and for so many reasons. But now if you just know a lot of passionate people come together, and you can have a game DAO, essentially, a DAO that's all about making this one project from many people. I think that's a really great opportunity, which is actually what I'm doing with my own personal project too. Like they just have a bunch of people online just come together, make a game, kind of like a DAO, which is also powered by the blockchain. And biggest thing I think blockchain or Web3 technology is doing is for me, yeah. It's for the first time, you are incentivized for being passionate of something, because traditionally, when you are passionate about something, you're using that as a hobby, not as a source of income, unless you really try hard. But then again, you really suck the fun out of it if that becomes a job. But now, from my observations, a lot of DAO people who are who has a strong voice within a DAO or any decentralized projects, they are the most passionate ones, and they earn money from this their passion. They're sustaining themselves, and everyone has a right to say comment on what they're saying. It's more flat and democratic, but also everyone's so passionate, and I think that's what really makes a better future. It's kind of like it's kind of, I guess Web3 is kind of doing like what PayPal did for small merchants, online merchants, but for communities and for any given project, for passion, essentially. So,
Thank you. I like this passion mention. Thank you very much for this. You know that passion actually comes from patere, a Latin verb that doesn't only mean joy, but it actually comes from suffer. So like passion in our, it's two sides of the same thing. I think we can't love something if we do not suffer. Sorry for this linguistic introduction. Matt, please.
Yeah, I think monetizing your passion, I think it's going to be big in Web3 in general. We talk a lot about the creators economy and whatnot, and I think that's what creators economy boils down to. So you don't have to have 1 million people following you on a platform, whatever website. You can only have a couple of people that are going to be so passionate about what you do, whether it's like creating music, creating videos, writing articles, whatever, creating content in general, that you can make a decent living out of it. So I think if it comes to like music industry that's so full of all those intermediaries and stuff like that, it's going to be game-changing. We are not there yet, but I think there are a ton of interesting attempts on this one. And also, passion, the creator economy is one thing, but also I think that what Web3 does very well is, in terms of like corporate governance or like from the managerial perspective in general, it can easily turn your stakeholders to your shareholders. So basically your client now becomes also an owner of part of what you do, of part of your business. And I think this is also an interesting flywheel because it drives engagement. It drives engagement through the roof. So now you have this one-on-one relationship, not only with the customer, but your wallet and their wallet also have this sort of one-on-one relationship. So basically, he becomes, or the client becomes, financially dependent on your financial success as well. And this is a weird kind of relationship because it's not that natural in Web2 at all. So usually I would argue that the people who hold shares in Web2 companies are not the same people usually that use those products or that are the customers in particular. So I think this is a different dynamics. Obviously, it also works the other way. So you can easily turn so you can also observe a lot of churn in terms of your shareholders, probably way bigger than what you could observe in Web2. So this is also an interesting metrics for the businesses built around Web3 to observe in general. But one more thing from the managerial perspective that I think is mind-boggling. I don't know if this is imposable or not on the large scale. But if you look at platforms like Dune Analytics or Flipside Crypto, so what they provide to the mainstream crypto user is radical transparency. So basically you could think about, so basically what you could do in comparison to Web2 with Dune Analytics, if I wanted to be a data analyst in Web2, and if we had something like Dune in Web2, I would go to Dune and check, and just typed Procter & Gamble and just checked how many, I don't know, products of that type have they sold in South Africa in this period of time to those particular customers. So you have this very, very radical transparency on a very granular level as well. So from the managerial perspective, as a business owner, you would have to always think about your actions, not in terms of the data that you release once a year, but the data that you release constantly. So that would probably cause also a huge shift in terms of managing businesses, in terms of PR as well. But you know, it probably is, it would be hard to implement for all of the businesses out there. But if you are building a business in a Web3 sort of manner, then you should definitely keep that in mind. You should definitely keep in mind that everybody, or almost everybody, is able to hold you accountable for what you do, not in a 1 year sort of aggregate period of time, but at all times that your business operates.
Thank you, Matt. Ricardo?
Yeah, I'm going to make this quick. So sustainability is really interesting. I think public goods, for me, to look at this border, one of the most interesting aspects of crypto, especially because you can start supporting public goods, and then you can directly see, where these funds are going towards, and people just don't take the money and then build something with it, and you have no clue, how they spent the money. It's more transparent. Like, imagine somebody would say, okay, I'm going to plant trees, and then you have an oracle that has access to satellite data, and the satellite can check if these trees have actually been planted. If that's the case, it's going to send you more money to plant more trees. Yeah, and that's all connected with smart contracts and satellite directly funneling the transactions for new trees that are being planted. So these are the aspects I really like about public goods, that you can financialize the sector and have a really transparent view over it. But then also privacy is, as you guys probably already heard about, really important for me. So I don't want that anybody's able to check what I spent in the past year and what I bought and stuff like that. If we can get into the CK layer deeper and make it possible with regulations that only in case I do something fraudulent or I appear to be somebody that is doing like like washing money or something like that, only in that case a judge can check my transactions. But otherwise, it's transparent to the overall public. Then those are the use cases that I like to see most.
This could be a discussion of a separate panel. But now the floor is yours, dear all. Questions, please. Or comments. I'm really curious of knowing, what do you think about the future of our life when the Web3 will be implemented, not only within our closed community, but when it's becoming more mainstream? Madhvi, please.
Hi, everyone. We talked a bit about social media here, so I'd love to go back to that. We haven't really seen it work at scale yet, but I'm curious from everyone's perspective, what would a social network run by a DAO actually look like, and would it even work?
So I think in general, the whole plutocracy problem, first of all, needs to be solved. So not that like investors just buy in money, they can make decisions that are more short-term. So everybody in the team of that social network should be invested and should make decisions. Where should we go next? Yeah, it should work very similar to like the purpose economy. If you guys are in Germany and you know the Purpose Foundation, companies like Ecosia, the search engine that plants trees based on search, are part of this. It should be run similar like to a purpose company, where every team member, everybody that is part of the DAO can decide and go and make the next decisions. And then also the profits, I feel, should go towards a good cause, towards a purpose, and not towards shareholders or even token holders. Yeah, so I feel that's the most important piece if it goes towards social media. And then essentially it should, as I said, be an advantage to use this social media over the existing ones. So we shouldn't just clone something, as on Lens right now you see many Twitter clones. I don't even know why they built like 3 or 4 Twitter clones.
They verify them.
Yeah. So it should be definitely something that is advantageous to use, and it's more fun, and it's also accessible to people that don't have a MetaMask wallet. Yeah.
Well, I think I could add on to your question about like how social media in blockchain or decentralized social media would look like. Well, it's going to be definitely very, very controversial, because that's the whole point about decentralization, is that it's free, but also it's very opinionated for that community. I could imagine a lot of trouble happening, but at the same time, I could imagine that's exactly the direction that a lot of people would want to go, for better or worse. But what's the limitation? Why can we not have that right now? Why is it so hard to create a decentralized social media? If we're talking about in terms of blockchain or on top of a blockchain, the biggest limitation I see right now is the token economics of a social media platform. Because what's the condition for earning a token? And here, token, assuming that the token has some sort of financial value tied to it, the main reason why you would want to reward the token is to reward whoever is maintaining the network or the service. And who would be providing that service? Are we paying, or should we pay the token to whoever is lending the hardware for all the post history and information? Do we want to embed that in the blockchain directly? I think that's a little bit too heavy for the blockchain. So probably want to use IPFS. The other problem is then if you want to incentivize people who are moderating the posts, then who validates the moderation? Who is the judge for like saying that, yeah, that moderator did a great job? Is it going to be a total vote? And if it's like a popularity contest where the most follower gets more tokens, then like there's going to be a lot of people who are just posting and botting the followers just because they want to make money. So there's like so many challenges I could see specifically around token economics that really justifies or enables having a completely decentralized social platform on a blockchain. Yeah.
Any other question? Please, last one.
So do you think on-chain privacy actually has a future in the current regulatory environment, like based on what happened to Tornado? And if you do, how does that square with what you said about transparency? Because I mean, Procter & Gamble can just go through any CK mechanism they like, and why would they not use it the same way they use, you know, the right to corporate secrets under the current legal paradigm if that was available?
Right. So on-chain privacy is a quite interesting topic because I don't think on-chain privacy should be the de facto feature for all blockchains. It should be an option. For certain cases, privacy makes sense. You don't want to show everything. For some cases, transparency makes sense because transparency could be your competitive advantage, and it should be treated as a competitive advantage, not as a force, right? And in terms of like regulation, I think the government was kind of reacting really fast because it's really hard to stop Tornado Cash, especially on-chain privacy and any like privacy protocols. But you can say that for any cryptography, like HTTPS. You use the internet for, I don't know, what if a terrorist uses the internet to communicate and we can't see their messages? How are we going to stop the terrorist, right? So should we ban encryption in general? Well, I mean, if you want to have a public conversation, you can that should be your option, yes. But for certain people, like privacy makes sense. But the reason why we still have encryption is because the value that that encryption gives outweighs the risk. So I think right now the problem is blockchains don't really have a lot of value for the governments, but it has more risk. That's why it was a natural decision. But once blockchain technology does provide more value and privacy provides more value, then I think that's where the future would really start for on-chain privacy.
Thank you very much. We are available for any comments or questions at the terrace, on the terrace and at the bar. And thank you very much for this insightful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.